family. This is a call for support for the Yahushua Estate Project. The video for the longer presentation will be linked in here or will be in the description. What if you had the chance to help Noah build the ark? What if you could stand beside Moses and Aaron as they led our people out of Egypt? Would you say yes? Would you act? Well, this mission is just like that. The Yahushua Estate is being built here in Ghana as a refuge, a safe place for the awakening remnant around the world. This is more than land. It's obedience, it's prophecy, it's preparation. So pray, share, and if Yahuwah leads you, give. Let's build this place together, and may Yahuwah bless us all.
Greetings, family. Welcome back to the AfrikanExodus show. My name is Sister Tierney, here to you with a new video. Before we get started with today's show, quick reminder to you all, if you do want to be connected with this platform outside of YouTube, you can add yourself to my Telegram channel. On there, I post anytime that I upload a new video. So you'll get a notification directly to your phone, or if there's anything else I just want to share, you'll also get a notification of that as well. Also, just let you know, the materials from today's show will be available on my Patreon. It will be available on a free tier. However, thank you to everyone who does support this platform. I'm very thankful to all of you. All right, so today we're going to be talking about a very important subject, and one that I pray, regardless of where you are in the world, regardless of what your position is, regardless of whether you are high up and prominent or whether you consider yourself climbing to try to become that, I pray that everyone take this message and pray about it and seek clarity. And when I mean seek clarity, if you have the Ruach HaKodesh, you should be able to hear Yah whenever it's time to move and whenever it's time to stay, whenever it's time to be somewhere, whenever it's time to not be somewhere. Rarely will Yah be completely quiet. Usually he will give you peace to say, yes, you are in the right place. Or he will tell you, no, you're not in the right place, but I don't want you to lead yet, but just start making moves. Or he might say, no, get up and go right now. Now, I want to emphasize that because some of us have not done the due diligence spiritually in order to make sure that we can hear from the Most High. Many of us have not separated ourselves from our friends, colleagues, from our family, enough to have that one-on-one time to know what it is that the Ruach is telling us to do in this particular season. So we did a Bible study. This will be the previous Bible study to this video, where my husband broke down that we are in a wilderness season, meaning we're not in the promised land. Obviously, the Messiah has not returned to regather us. And we're not supposed to be in Babylon, right? He said, come out of Babylon. But when you're coming out of Babylon, you're going into a wilderness, meaning you're going into a place of refinement. But the natural question has to be, well, am I actually being called out of Babylon in a physical sense? Because something that a lot of people will say is, no, it's just a spiritual sense. I'm only being called out of Babylon as far as the religious system of Babylon, which we know comes from the mystery schools, which we know we can see manifestations of in Judaism. You could see manifestations of that religious system inside of Christianity, especially you see it more strongly in Catholicism. Some people will minimalize it to that and say, no, that's what the scripture means when it tells us to come out of Babylon. So what I'm going to start breaking down, and I think we're probably going to do this in 2 parts, maybe 3, but probably 2 parts. I want us to have a very clear understanding of what the scripture means when it's telling us to come out. When I say very clear, I mean not opinion-based, but just based on the text and the Ruach revealing things in this time, the season that we're in, the world that we're in, the chaos that is coming any moment now, that we be sensitive in the Ruach as far as what the scripture means and how it pertains to this season right here. So I'm going to, in this video, just talk to you about Babylon. I want us to understand when the scripture tells us, flee from Babylon, the daughter of Babylon, or come out of her, come out of Babylon. I want us to understand what Babylon is. Because if you understand what Babylon is, then you can make that judgment. Spiritually, going in prayer, you should be able to make that judgment of whether or not you're being called to make changes in your life. Is Babylon, in a sense, just a spiritual Babylon, or is this a physical place that we should be distancing ourselves from and coming out from? So let's start with the actual scripture that we're referring to. We're going to go to Revelation 18, starting with verse 1. And these things I saw, another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated from his glories. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have fallen because of the wine of her passion, the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. And the kings of the earth have committed acts of sexual immorality with her. And the merchants of the earth have become rich from the excessive wealth of her luxury. I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive any of her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and Elohim has remembered her offenses. Pay her back even as she has paid, and get back to her double according to her deeds. And the cup which she has mixed twice as much for her. To the extent that she has glorified herself and lived luxuriously, to the same extent give her torment and mourning. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen and I am not a widow, and will never see mourning. For this reason, in one day her plagues will come, plague and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire. For Yahuwah Elohim, who judges her, is strong. Verse 9, and the kings of the earth who committed acts of sexual immorality and lived luxuriously with her will weep and mourn over her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargo of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every article of ivory, and every article made from very valuable wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, perfume, frankincense, wine, olive oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, a cargo of horses, carriages, slaves, and human lives. The fruit you long for has left you, and all the things that were luxurious and splendid have passed away from you, and people will no longer find them. The merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at a distance because of the fear of her torment, weeping and mourning, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, she who was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great wealth has been laid waste. And every shipmaster, every passenger and sailor, and all who make their living by the sea stood at a distance and were crying out as they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads and were crying out, weeping and mourning, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, in which all who had ships at sea became rich from her prosperity. For in 1 hour she has been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because Elohim has pronounced judgment for you against her. Then a strong angel picked up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, So will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will never be found again. And the sound of harpists, musicians, flute players, and trumpeters will never be heard of you again. And no craftsman of any craft will ever be found in you again. And the sound of a mill will never be heard in you again. And the light of a lamp will never shine in you again. And the voice of the groom and bride will never be heard in you again. And your merchants were the powerful people of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your witchcraft. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints, and of all who have been slaughtered on her. So many of you I know are very familiar with this scripture. We've read it on this channel many times, and we're going to go through and break it down methodically to understand, am I in Babylon? And if I'm in Babylon, as it's described, the same Babylon that says, come out of her, my people. If I'm in Babylon, is that me being in the will of the Most High? That's the question I wanted to ask. So let's go from the top. I want to start inside of verse 3. As you see, it says, nation had fall because of the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. So the passion of her sexual immorality has caused nations to fall. Then it also says the kings of the earth have committed acts of sexual immorality with her. And then the merchants of the earth have become rich from the excessive wealth of her luxury. So a few things. One, we've talked about many times whenever words are used in scripture, they will be literally conveying what it actually says, but also saying something with more spiritual significance. So when we see sexual immorality, have we seen sexual immorality pervaded everywhere? Have we seen it? You see it on the movies, you see it on the corner, you see it on your social media. Yes, absolutely. We see the PORN word. We see that everywhere, right? We see the objectification of women everywhere. So this is something that has come out of Babylon. We see the alternative lifestyles. We see the trans lifestyle. We see the LGBT lifestyle, all of these things which are sexual immorality. So are these things being pushed by the Babylonian system, by the international system that we live under? Absolutely. However, there's also double entendres in scripture, as I said, and sexual immorality also, whenever you read in the scripture, many times is talking about committing sexual immorality against the Most High. For example, the Yashraelites, the Israelites, whenever they would go and worship false gods, Yahuwah would accuse them, tell them, you have committed sexual immorality, you are prostituting yourself. So in the same way, Yah considers the worship of false gods as a form of sexual immorality. So this is being conveyed also in this scripture. So let's keep that in mind, sexual immorality that has caused the nations to fall. Also, the kings of the earth have participated inside of this sexual immorality. Again, you could say that for both of the understandings of sexual immorality. You could say that the rulers of this world are great purveyors of sexual immorality. If you see, for example, the series that came from Candace Owens' channel talking about the pedophilia in France and how the president, Emmanuel Macron, is very much in these type of circles, you will know that, yes, these are something that happens inside of the occult circles. It's something that happens with the bloodline families. It's something that happens with the ruling class, that sexual immorality in the literal sense is very strong there. But also, obviously, idolatry, the worship of false gods, is very much common amongst this same group. But then there's also something that I want you to notice. It says the excessive wealth of her luxury. Now, I think the more that you get into these details, you have to ask yourself, are we just talking about a religious system? Are we just talking about the Roman Catholic faith? Are we just talking about the mystery schools? Are we just talking about the esoteric schools? Or are we talking about something that has a real tangible effect, something that is actually physical, something that actually is material? And when you see the luxury that is not just spoken about once, but over and over again in this same scripture, I would have a very hard time separating with the scripture that says come out of Babylon without talking about that material wealth that it's also talking about. So let's go down to verse 9. Okay, again, the kings of the earth committed sexual immorality. They lived luxuriously with her. They will be weeping and mourning as they'll see the smoke going up, standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, whoa, whoa. Okay, I want you to notice this, the great city. So where it says the great city, the actual word in the Greek is polis. So I'm going to go to the Strong's Concordance for Greek. In the Greek, it says that it is a city or cities, to bustle, or also it says a town probably with walls of greater or less size, probably the same as polymos, or perhaps polis, a town properly with walls or of greater or less size. Now, I want to emphasize that I'm going to come back to that point later, but I want you to keep this Paulist word inside of your mind because some people have tried to make this like a specific geographical location. This is the actual city of Rome. I don't think that's true. Now, you could say Rome's a part of Babylon, but we have to look at the greater picture of what this Babylon system is. Absolutely, Rome has a big part of that. Also, I want you all to realize, though, that Rome is not, again, the only purveyors of the Babylon religion. I want you to honestly understand that before Rome, you had Judaism also being a purveyor of the Babylon religion. So we can't just start with Rome. Rome comes after Judaism. Before Judaism, you had the same mystery schools that come out of ancient Babylon and ancient Egypt. So to just say this whole scripture is just talking about Rome, Rome comes after a lot of this, is absolutely an inheritor of those false religions. But it's not the totality of them. And to miss that is to miss really the greater picture of what's happening in this world that we're in, because we're being brought into that same religious system. And I don't think that the Catholics are going to be the ones who are leading us to it. As I said in a previous video, I'll post it on the screen where I talk about who is the mystery of Babylon, the woman riding on the beast. Notice what happens to the woman riding on the beast. The woman riding on the beast, as I said, I believe represents Catholicism, the perversion of the way. The way was the true teachings of the followers of Yahushua. But if you notice what happens to that woman, she's riding the beast and it seems like it's cool with them for a long time. But at a certain point, the beast actually turns on her and she no longer is going to be an ally. That's literally happening in real time when you look at Catholicism. And not just that, when you look at the greater picture of Freemasonry, you know that although at one time you would have Catholic elements that were involved inside of Freemasonry and vice versa, that ultimately they are mortal enemies whenever you actually look at the history of Catholicism with Freemasonry. But I don't want you to lose this point. I just want you to keep in mind that it's not just Rome, it's a bigger system that we're talking about. And emphasize verse 11, because this is where I think the argument that this is talking about a spiritual system falls apart. Because we are getting a very particular description of what this Babylon is. It says, in the merchants of the earth, right? That's verse 11. And it talks about their cargo. Okay, so we have merchants, you have people who are selling things, people who are trading things, and then you talk about their cargo. And the scripture is so particular to even call out so many luxurious items: gold, silver, stones, pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet. It goes on now. We already read the whole scripture, but as you see, this covers every single angle you want to look at it. Like, it covers the things as far as luxury items, as far as like materials and fine stones, but then it also talks about the food. It also talks about animals that you may eat. It talks about wheat, cattle, sheep, and goats. It also talks about slave labor. It talks about every single aspect of the economy, at least for that day, right? Obviously, it's not talking about things like iPhones, because iPhones didn't exist at that day. I doubt the Apostle John would have understood what an iPhone was. It doesn't talk about things like laptops. It doesn't talk about those types of things. But as far as the material, the things that are being called out in the scripture, pretty much every single aspect of life in ancient society, these are the materials that the merchants will be weeping over, okay? These are actual, tangible items that people will no longer have access to. Now, if you think about that, at that time in the world, was this have been significant? Yes, because the Roman Empire that did rule, as we're going to read about, and that Roman Empire absolutely had a form of globalization. And that form of globalization, is pretty effective. But if you compare that to today, where globalization, you probably cannot get, let's say, 50% of what you want to eat without going outside of the country. And that's being very favorable. Most people, it's far more than that. You probably could not get vast majority of the things that you buy unless you go to another country. And certainly you can't locally, probably not in your city, definitely not in your state. So what does that mean? This means this is a system that is international, and we see this system in real time, but I don't want to jump ahead. I just want you to keep this in mind. This is talking about merchants, business people. This is talking about people who are selling things. These people will be weeping and mourning when Babylon is judged, okay? And then lastly, I want to hit this last point, verse 22, because this is talking about harpists, musicians, flute players, trumpeters, and craftsmen, any crafts that could ever be found, people who, in the sound of a mill. And what this is pointing to is, again, it's not just the economic system, it's not just the religious system, but it's also the cultural system. It's also the musicians and the artists. It's also the people who might not have the same type of power as like a hardcore businessman, but these people are a very important part of Babylon because they are the ones who are the spreaders of the ideology. They are the ones that represent the luxury. They represent the idolatry. They represent all of the wickedness in their arts, and that's not insignificant. So what are some things we can just take away from what we know in this scripture? Because what we're going to do is we're going to talk about whether or not we are in Babylon and whether or not we are being called out of it. So oneness in culture and religion. That's an important aspect, obviously. We also have power militarily. So again, think about those kings who are all involved inside of this. These are people who have not just economic power, but they have the might of their military, their militias, and whatnot. Economically, this, again, scripture talks more about the merchants than it talks about the spiritual system. So it's talking about an economic system. And then control over vast parts of the world all at once. These are some common themes that you're going to see inside of this discussion we have today. So with that, I want us to go to the first example that we have of Babylon, because this, again, sets for us the stage as far as what it is that Yah condemned about this system, what it is about this system that came against him, and why the first Babylon at the Tower of Babel was destroyed. So Genesis 11, 1-9, and all the earth was one lit, and there was one language to all. And it came to pass as they moved from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And a man said to his neighbor, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them with fire." And the brick was to them for stone, and their mortar was bitumen. And they said, "Come, let us build to ourselves a city and a tower, whose top shall be to heaven. And let us make to ourselves a name before we are scattered abroad upon the face of all the earth." And Yahuwah came down to the city and the tower, which the sons of men built. And Yahuwah said, "Behold, there is one race and one lip of all, and they have begun to do this. And now nothing shall fail from them of all that they may have undertaken to do. Come, and having gone down, let us there confound their tongue, that they may not understand each the voice of his neighbor." And Yahuwah scattered them thence over the face of all the earth. They left off building the city and the tower. On this account, its name was called Confusion, because there was Yahuwah confounded the languages of all the earth, and thence Yahuwah scattered them upon the face of all the earth. Now, I want you to think about how this scenario compares to today. All the people were of one tongue. Do we have one language today? No, we do not. Would that happen again today? Probably not. But what do we have? We have the ability to speak to anyone we want to. How do we have that ability? Well, if you have a phone, if you have the ability to download apps, if you have the ability to download a language translator through AI, you could literally talk to anyone you want. Not just that, they were of one mind. What does social media do globally? It has a hive mentality that it creates for people who log in. You become a part of that system, very similar to the Matrix. You have become a part of their system, to where they can export to you ideas. They can export to you the norms that they are trying to create. as far as their system. And it's also important to note that they did this thing unto themselves. It said, let us make this unto ourselves. Let us make a name for ourselves. These people want to establish themselves as competitors to Elohim and able to stand on their own without him. That's very common today, obviously. So with that being said, are we in Babylon right now? If you're in Babylon, where is it? Where isn't it? To me, you can know what Babylon is really whenever you understand what the previous Babylons were. And so I want us to reflect on the book of Daniel. In fact, I'm going to show you an image right here. This is the statue or a depiction of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw in a vision that he received. And when he had this vision, Yah had given the interpretation to the prophet Daniel. Now, the reason why I say you have to go there is because he breaks down the beginning and the end as far as the first Babylon, which was really the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And so now when we have a new Babylon Empire that's not the same, but all the while has the same DNA still present and functioning within it. So let's go to that scripture before we start going through these different Babylons in history. We're going to start with Daniel chapter 2, verse 31. So again, this is the interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Thou, O King, sawest and behold an image. That image was great, and the appearance of it excellent. Standing before thy face, and the form of it was terrible. It was an image, the head of which was of fine gold, its hands and breast and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of brass, its legs of iron, its feet, part iron and part of earthenware. Thou sawest until a stone was cut out of a mountain, without hands, and it smote the image upon its feet of iron and earthenware, and utterly reduced them to powder. Then once for all the earthenware, the iron, the brass, the silver, the gold, were ground to powder, and became as chaff from the summer threshing floor. And the violence of the wind carried them away, and no place was found for them. And the stone which had smitten the image became a great mountain, and filled all the earth. This is the true dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, to whom the Elohim of heaven has given a powerful and strong and honorable kingdom. In every place where the children of men dwell, and he has given into thine hand the wild beasts of the field, and the birds of the sky, and the fish of the sea, and he has made thee Lord of all. Thou art the head of gold. After thee shall arise another kingdom, inferior to thee, and the third kingdom, which is brass, which shall have dominion over all the earth. And a fourth kingdom, which shall be strong as iron beats to powder and subdues all things. So it beat to powder and subdue. And whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of the earthenware and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. Yet there shall be in it of the strength of iron, as thou sawest, the iron mixed with earthenware. And whereas the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of earthenware, part of the kingdom shall be strong, and part of it shall be broken. Whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with earthenware, they shall be mingled with the seed of men. But they shall not cleave together, as the iron does not mix itself with earthenware. And in the days of those kings, the Elohim of heaven shall set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and his kingdom shall not be left to another people, but it shall beat to pieces and ground to powder all other kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Whereas thou sawest that a stone was cut out of a mountain without hands, and it beat to pieces the earthenware, the iron, the brass, the silver, the gold. The great Elohim has made known to the king what must happen hereafter, and the dream is true, and the interpretation thereof sure. So why the disagreement about so many things when it comes to end time prophecy? I did a whole series on end time prophecy, by the way, because I disagree with almost all of the mainstream narrative about what the end times are. There's pretty much wide consensus about the identity of the different components of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of. So Daniel said, the head, that's you, that's Babylon. Okay. The next part, who is that? That becomes the Persians and the Medes. After that, it then comes the Greeks. After that, we have the Romans. And then after that, we have the last kingdom, which it says is iron and earthenware, iron and clay, depending on the translation that you have. So we don't have a lot of disagreement, honestly. Most people agree that we are at the point of the feet, which is iron and earthenware, iron and clay. Now, as far as how is that the case, some people believe it's Rome again. Other people, like myself, think this is clearly the American empire, and the empire, which is broken, but is still the most powerful empire to have ever existed. Although it's scattered all over the world, and although it's weakening as we speak, it's going to be destroyed, I believe, very soon. So let's start going through the different Babylons, because we have to, again, analyze ourselves. Are we inside of Babylon as we speak? Do we need to come out? I want you to understand first the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So this, again, was the head of the statue. It says, I'm reading from history.com, Anu-Lamech kings established the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which lasted from 626 BC to 539 BC. The Neo-Babylonian Empire became the most powerful state in the world after defeating the Assyrians at Nineveh in 612 BC. And I want you to note how many times we talk about this. The most powerful in the world at that time, okay? The Neo-Babylonian Empire enjoyed a period of cultural renaissance in the Near East. The Babylonians built many beautiful and lavish buildings and preserved statues and artworks from the earlier Babylonian Empire during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II. Okay, now we're going to Britannica on the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Babylonia thrived after the fall of the Assyrian Empire, assisted by its lack of external enemies near its heartland for the first 60 years of its rule. The Neo-Babylonian kings oversaw a period of rapid social and economic consolidation. The business class regained its strength not only in the trades and commerce, but also in the management of agriculture surrounding urban areas. The cultivation of cereal, grains, dates, and vegetables grew in importance, aided by imperial maintenance of existing canal systems and construction of many supplementary canals to make the land more fertile. Livestock, breeding sheep, goats, beef, cattle, and horses, flourished, as did poultry farming. Much was done to improve the communications, both by water and by land, with the western provinces of the empire. Trade arteries that once ran through Assyria were rerouted through Babylonia. The empire had a well-functioning administrative system which collected high taxes and tributes that were used to maintain Babylon's armies and carry out imperial building projects. So I think that you can get the picture. Babylon was not some ancient society that was trivial, though they were well-planned. They were powerful, they had military might, and they also had control over the economic system within their empire. And they had an economic system that was very much based on the imperial exploits. So let's go to the next one. We're going to go to the Persian Empire, one that we don't talk about as much, but you should absolutely understand them. The Persian Empire, also known as the, I might butcher this, Achaemenid Empire, lasted approximately from 559 BCE to 331 BCE. At its height, it encompassed the areas of modern-day Iran, Egypt, Turkey, and parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Persian Empire emerged under the leadership of Cyrus II, who conquered the neighboring Median Empire ruled by his grandfather. From then on, Cyrus was called the Shah, or King of Persia. Eventually, he was known as Cyrus the Great. Cyrus, unlike other emperors, because he showed mercy toward the city and kingdom he conquered. He was known to spare the life of a defeated king so that the king could guide Cyrus in successfully ruling over the captive subjects. Cyrus also practiced religious and cultural tolerance toward conquered peoples. Cyrus' relative Darius I took the throne after him and built the empire to its greatest height. Darius recognized that such a large area needed to be properly structured and organized in order to function efficiently. He set up a system of provinces and governors and a postal service that spanned the empire in order to establish widespread communication. Here we go with widespread communication again. So not too huge of a difference between ancient Babylon and ancient Persia or the Medes and the Persians as far as how the state ran. But a shift came, I would say, when it came to the Greek Empire, which took over and was the Babylon successor at that point. So ancient Greek civilization is a Britannica on Greek civilization, the period following the Mycenaean civilization, which ended about 1200 BCE to the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE. It was a period of political, philosophical, artistic, and scientific achievements that formed a legacy with unparalleled influence. The larger historical period spanning from the output of the Greek author Homer in the 8th century BCE to the decline of the Roman Empire in the 5th century CE is known as Classical Antiquity, encompassing Greco-Roman culture, playing a major role in the Mediterranean sphere of influence and in the creation of Western civilization, in shaping areas as diverse as law, architecture, art, language, poetry, rhetoric, politics, and philosophy. So I want to emphasize with the Greeks is that their greatest accomplishment was basically culture. They formed the mindset that many people have today. In fact, many of you probably saw, I have a clip of Pastor Miles Monroe, who is deceased sadly, but he broke down how the Greek mindset exists until today, because the Romans, who we're going to talk about next, they basically took the Greek mindset and said, these ideas are so great, this works, let's just put some military might behind them and go conquer the world. So that has to be emphasized. Greeks, they definitely were a powerful empire, not as much militarily as the Romans, but what were they? They captured the minds of the people. They Hellenized much of the world. They made people want to be them. So let's just look again. I want to repeat some of these. Again, the culture, we talk about law, architecture, arts, language, poetry, rhetoric, politics, and philosophy. Think about what we talked about when we're talking about the crafts, the arts, that aspect of Babylon that really kicks into high gear with the Greek society. Now, remember I told you all to remember this word polis. This is the same word right here. I want you to understand that this took on a new meaning whenever the Greeks took over. So it says the name given to polis formation by the Greeks themselves was, and I'm going to butcher this, synoikimos, literally a gathering together. Synoikimos could take one or both or two forms. It could be a physical concentration of the population in a single city, or an act of purely political unification that allowed the population to continue living in a dispersed way. So I want to emphasize that even though it talks about a city in Revelation, the actual word polis that comes from Greek, it could be a city, but it could also be a dispersed people, but they all are falling under the same state. I'll give you more information on this. This is Ancient Origins, talking about polis. In the society of ancient Greeks, the polis or the city-state was perhaps the most distinctive and important political innovation at the time. Emerging around the 8th century BC, this institution became a fundamental aspect of the Greek civilization. Defining Greek life for centuries, the polis was not merely a city, but a distinct socio-political entity. Its emergence and development were closely connected with the traditional social structures of the time, the economy and the landscape of Greece. And as such, it shaped the development of Greek identity, politics, and culture. But most importantly, the polis laid the foundations for major political concepts that shaped the governance of the time, such as democracy, civic participation, and citizenship. So I would say the biggest thing that you could take away from this, the polis created an identity. Kind of like when you have some people who overly identify with their nation or their city or their state, like that is the only thing that they can see. If you look at the United States right now, there's a lot of jingoistic rhetoric that says some people overly identify with their nation. Some people do that in different countries. Pretty much every country, there's some people who do that. The polis, that was something that very similar, where their identity was their city. Their identity was in it. Their culture was in it. Their economy was in it. Their arts was in it. That was who they were. That's where they were a citizenship of. They were a citizen of that system. So now we have to go to probably the most important one, I would say, just my opinion, when it comes to those on Nebuchadnezzar's statue, particularly those that succeed Babylon, because Rome really takes the world by storm with military might. And you would say is really probably the one architecture of the one society that became the architecture of this modern society is Rome, because Greek definitely influenced the culture, but Romans drove that military thirst, that war thirst that we see happening all over the world today. So I'm actually going to go to an entire article. I'll post the whole thing on Patreon. I'm going to just read one part of it real quick, and then I want you to understand these different aspects. So it says 10 things that made ancient Rome a great power. So the Roman aqueducts, ancient Rome could count on many amenities during the day, including public toilets, underground sewers, fountains, and thermal baths. However, none of these water structures could exist without the function of the Roman aqueducts. And aqueducts were known as the primitive canals for irrigation purposes that already existed in Egypt. But it was only the Romans who popularized them, adding even more momentum. Okay, so these canals for irrigation, very important. I'm going to just scroll through this so that you get an idea of the things that made Rome so powerful. The Roman cement, it made the construction of things like the Pantheon, the Colosseum, the Forum Romanum. That cement was very important. Newspapers, going back to the communication, that was very important for them. Obviously, you're trying to control the minds of the people. You're not just trying to control them with might. You want them to buy into this idea. You don't want the people to feel like they're being occupied or being controlled. Prosperity said I did not know this, the first social programs in subsidizing food, education, and expenses appeared in ancient Rome. So there you go. You want to talk about a welfare state that first appears inside of ancient Rome. Books, obviously, very important. Roads, Roman arches, that arches will have a lot of spiritual significance as far as being, basic portals into the supernatural. I just want to throw that in, though. The Julian calendar, a calendar system, the Roman law, surgery, the medical system that comes out of Rome. These are some things that give you an idea of what Rome was like. Now, if you're like me, you're like, wow, Rome doesn't sound that different. It actually sounds a lot like the United States, which brings us to the United States. So I just had that in mind. Rome was a military power, as a cultural power. It was not like any other society like it, and none has come just like it before, but there's been alterations to the imperial setup that was done, obviously, from the British Empire. We've talked a lot about them. Obviously, right now we're under the American Empire, which has gone further in some ways than the British Empire. So we're going to go to this article by the Council of Foreign Relations. A little long. I'm going to read it quickly and swiftly as I can. But I want you to just understand how America succeeded that power. It's not the NATO nations. I used to think that as well. It's not the NATO nations as far as being the daughter of Babylon, the end time daughter of Babylon. They are part of the daughter of Babylon, but the head is the United States. You have to understand that as of now, the NATO nations are very weak and they are dependent on the United States of America. This is something that doesn't get emphasized enough. They are literally dependent. As we saw all of them go to Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago, begging Trump, please do not stop sending aid to Ukraine. Please protect us from Russia. These nations are not the head of Babylon. They are the backup, basically. So counseling for relations, how did the United States become a global power? However, when the United States troops landed in Europe in 1942, the tide began to shift against the Axis powers. So obviously the Axis was winning. Hitler was winning. Mussolini was winning. The Japanese, for some reason, I don't know who the leader was of Japan in World War II. But they were winning at one point, and so the United States jumped in. And also, if you know anything about that scenario, it was also because of the Soviet winter that started to turn the tide. So Germany soon found itself caught between a Soviet counteroffensive in the east and a U.S.-led offensive in the west. Germany ultimately surrendered on May 7th, 1945. Japan followed soon thereafter, surrendering on August 14th after the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs, one on Hiroshima and the other on Nagasaki. President Harry Truman decided to deploy atomic weapons to avoid a costly invasion of Japan, that's what they say. By the end of the war, some 16 million Americans served in Europe, the largest mobilization of U.S. military service members in the country's history. I want to emphasize that none of us had no clue what a world war would look like. We've seen wars. We've seen war in Vietnam. We've seen wars in Korea. We've seen wars in Iraq. We have not seen a world war. That World War II was the largest mobilization of our military to date. The fighting also came at a tremendous cost. More than 400,000 American soldiers died, and some 70 million people perished as a result of the violence, disease, and famine that accompanied World War II. Okay, so here's what I wanted to get to. As the smoke cleared, the United States stood victoriously with an unprecedented global power. In addition to towering as the world's military heavyweight, the United States boasted the most valuable currency, the dollar, to which all other major currencies had become fixed. Okay, so I want to emphasize this so much, but prayerfully you understand the significance. When we talk about Revelation 18, we talk about our economic system, and we talk about the United States dollar, the most valuable currency, to which all the other major currencies became fixed. In addition, a country's economy had taken off during the war, nearly doubling in size between 1939 and 1945. In stark contrast, Western Europe's country contracted by 18%, and Japan was cut in half. The economic and military strength uniquely positioned the United States to promote post-war peace and prosperity. Now, by the way, Council of Foreign Relations, basically Illuminati mouthpiece, so obviously they're trying to paint this lightly, but we know that what followed is a not peace and prosperity, particularly for the people in the quote-unquote third world. They became occupied under colonialism. Now, it's at this time, instead of retreating to the Western Hemisphere as it did in World War I, the United States resolved to prop Europe back up and rebuild Japan. In particular, the United States sought to ensure Europe's physical, economic, and political collapse and not allow the Soviet Union to withstand its influence. Washington's wartime alliance with Moscow began to transform into a geopolitical rivalry of the Cold War. To shore up the United States allies, Secretary of State George C. Marshall announced a multi-billion-dollar aid plan in 1947. In addition, the United States agrees to provide military assistance to rebuild Western armies. In 1949, the United States, Canada, and 10 European countries formed a military alliance known as NATO. The cornerstone of this alliance was collective security. The pledge of an attack on one country would be treated as an attack on all. This groundbreaking peacetime alliance made the United States, with its outsized military strength, effectively the defender of the Western world. So here we are, the defender of the Western world. The military might of the entire system is the United States. Likewise, in Asia, the United States occupied and assisted in post-war reconstruction of Japan when Mao Zedong brought up a communist government to power in China in 1949. Despite U.S. opposition, the United States established several bilateral alliances with countries in the region to prevent the further spread of communism. American involvement in the Korean War confirmed the United States' readiness to use military strength to resist communist expansion. And listen, like I said, this website, I want to emphasize, they're painting a very rosy picture of this. This was a bloody time. The Korean War, Vietnam, very bloody wars, very imperialistic, ravaged those countries, destroyed the lives of many people. So let's never let these people get away with what they have done to this world and make it seem like, oh, they were just spreading democracy. No, they were destroying the lives of so many people. The United States took the lead in creating a series of international institutions to promote cooperation on global issues. The United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, which are the purveyor of neocolonialism today, we know. were established to govern international security and monetary policy. The United States has championed this global system of multilateral institutions known as the liberal world order for the past 75 years. And at the close of World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill declared that the United States stood at the summit of the world. So what I want to emphasize to you from this, and I hope you got the picture, is that we are in a world led by the United States. Now, so many people are waiting for a new world order to appear. I've already argued, and I'll post a video here. The new world order is here, has been here since World War II. As it says, the liberal world order, that is the same system that we are talking about. That's the system that we live under with the United Nations, the IMF, and the World Trade Organization, and the other one, can't remember the other one, but I'll put it on the screen. These organizations form the New World Order, as well as so many international organizations. The commonality is international cooperation. So I want to emphasize that, but I want to get back to the conversation about Babylon, right? We are inside of a world led by the United States, okay? So when scripture says, come out of Babylon, and what this gets described to us, sexual morality, okay, that's wide inside of Western society. They are pushing it. They're pushing it in countries where they never even heard of certain things. They're pushing it in Africa. They're pushing it in other third world countries. Sexual immorality. And obviously the idolatry. They're pushing that too. They're pushing that through movies. They're pushing that through their culture, right? The language that they use. The social media gets pushed. There's a reason why you have all of these nonprofit charities giving cell phones to everyone, giving computers to everyone. They're trying to push their culture everywhere, right? And they've succeeded pretty much, right? So you have that aspect of the sexual morality that's pushed, right? And it's normalized. It's normal now. I mean, in many places that would never accept certain customs inside of Western society, they're now accepting it. And it's like, it's just another day to them. Then you have the luxury, right? Or the military might. That was the other one. So you have the military might that is ruling this world. The United States, the largest military in this world, has bases all over the world. U.S. imperialism, you've never seen anything like it. That's why they call it the world police, okay? Then you have the luxury, okay? The U.S. dollar. Not just that, though, when it talks about the creation of a globalized world, I want you to understand that the globalization of this world is literally what Revelations was talking about. When it goes through talking about how the merchants of the world are going to be mourning because of Babylon, mourning, they're going to be mourning, oh, we can't ship this, we can't ship that, and how are we going to get this, how are we going to get that? That's globalization. If you understand the system that they built after World War II, you understand that we are very dependent on an international economy if you are inside of the West. So I'm going to read from a book. I read this book many times on this channel because this was probably a game changer for me as far as wanting a different life, wanting a world where a life where I wasn't inside of the system, where I could be without the system. I highly recommend this book. It's not particularly spiritually enlightening, but it's definitely enlightening as far as understanding the place that we live in. This matrix has been created for us where we are totally dependent on the international system. But I'm just going to read a very quick part. I want you to see the part that I've said woke me up, unlike anything else. So before we talked about when I read this book, he breaks down book, Surviving Off-Grid, Decolonizing the Industrial Mind by Michael Funker. He breaks down Rome and how Rome was very efficient, was very technological, and really very much like the United States. Then he broke down how when Rome collapsed, the people didn't know what to do because they have depended so much on the system, particularly the people inside of the cities or the polis, right? That they didn't know how to farm, they didn't know how to cook, they didn't know how to do a lot of things for themselves, to the point where when the system collapsed, many of them died. Many of them even became cannibals. That's how much they did not know how to sustain themselves without the system of Rome. So he brings up this point. He says, I'm going to make a statement that might shock some people, and you would do well to ruminate on it for some time, okay? I believe if tomorrow there was some sort of massive and comprehensive systematic disaster resulting in a loss of JIT goods and services and a loss in available grid electric power and water, And if that disaster, whether man-made or natural, caused a scenario where omnipresent paternal government could not or would not be able or willing to send any appreciable aid for a long period of time, that fully half or more, that fully half or more of the population of the United States, or of just about any country for that matter, would die in less than a year. 150 million plus deaths in less than a year just in the United States. And I believe that my prediction is probably on the conservative side. But Rome never thinks she can fall. Now, I want you to think about what he said. Because I remember I had this book on audiobook when I first bought it, and I was driving. I was actually driving from DC. And when he said this, I'm like, wow. If the grid were to fall down, right, and the government is busy doing other things, right? If the grid were to collapse, there was some type of electrical issue, like on the movie Leave the World Behind, where these cell phones weren't working, government, we don't know where the government is, right? And so that means that the grocery stores that you go to, you can't go to them anymore. It's probably been raided, probably be empty, right? After, it wouldn't take too long for a grocery store to empty. That means that the water companies probably would stop service at some point. That means that everything in that system, you probably would not have a way to get the basic things of life, right? And if that were to collapse, I realized, at least in my living situation then, wow, I would be a part of the casualties. I don't have the ability to grow my own food. I don't have the ability to obtain my own water. And I don't live in a place where that's possible. I don't live in a place where most people have a garden or are able to provide some type of sustenance. I live in a place that's very dependent on the grid. I'm dependent on my grocery store. I'm dependent on Amazon. I'm dependent on this international economy. I'm absolutely 100% dependent. And reading that and understanding that woke me up to the fact that I'm dependent on something other than Yahuwah, okay? Now, that being said, when you consider whether or not you are in the same Babylon that we're told to come out of, ask yourself, are you dependent on Rome? Are you dependent on Babylon? Are you dependent on Persia? Are you dependent on Greece? Are you dependent on that in order to live? And while I'm asking that, does that make you comfortable that you don't have the ability to live without them? Does that bring a place where you could make a compromise? Now, you might say, I'm not, this is not meaning that I need to get out of the system. Well, I just want you to articulate, is there any scenario where you should feel comfortable being dependent on for your food? That, not on the earth, not on the land, but being dependent on the system to give you your food. These are things that we have to pray about and things that we have to seek the Most High on. So I'm going to wrap that up there. Like I said, we'll get more into the scriptures that talk about come out of Babylon, leave from the daughter of the north. There's quite a few scriptures that make these references. And so I just want us to have a scripturally based conversation on that. But what I really wanted to get your mind start thinking about is, am I living in a condition that I should feel okay with, right? That's just the basic bottom line. I would submit that what the scripture is trying to tell us is that being dependent on Babylon goes hand in hand with participating in her sins. And so we have to be very clear on whether our life has a degree of separation that's needed, or whether we're too interconnected and too dependent to the point where our material world is determinative of a wicked system. So that's all I'm going to say on this for now. Definitely let's get more into this conversation next week, but y'all willing, I will see you all in the next video.
I discovered that the Greeks actually still rule the world. The Greeks are ruling the world from their grave. As a matter of fact, dead men rule the Bahamas. Dead men. Dead men rule America. Dead men. Dead men rule Europe. Dead men. Why? Their ideas are so powerful. They left it after they died. They invented democracy, and it's ruling the whole Western world, including the Bahamas. That's dead men ruling your country. The Greeks believed that you who were born with certain unique traits were automatically leaders. Those who were born without those traits are automatically slaves. So their society was very, very neat. No traits, traits. Slaves, leaders. Let me give you an example, because when I read the traits, I became a little bit sick. One of the traits were, if you were born with sharp pointed nose, blue eyes, fair skin like white, and thin lips. This is written in their document. You were born to be a leader. And if you weren't born with those qualities, then their conclusion was you were created by the divine gods to be a slave. They believe that. So it doesn't matter what you think about yourself. They would study you and see if you have those natural endowments. If you don't have them, it doesn't matter how many degrees you get from college. You are simply an educated slave. So this is serious. So this is the philosophy of the day. So putting on a suit and wearing a tie didn't impress them. You are simply a well-dressed slave. See, some of y'all think that changed. That's why I'm getting to it slowly. I'm working my way there. See, some of y'all think that because you came back home with a PhD, that they ain't gonna bring the white consultant in and work over you. And you got more degrees. Because somewhere in their twisted mind, they are still sick with Greek thinking. Here's the problem. When the Greeks were invaded by the Romans invaded this culture of the Greeks, but the Romans normally would go into a place and, wipe out the place. But when they came to Greece, they saw the beautiful temples, they saw all these gods, and beautiful statues. And then the Romans came to the capital and they saw the library with all these scrolls, all these writings. I mean, thousands of scrolls. And the Romans were so impressed. Now, the Romans are military guys. They're not into thinking. They're into fighting. So when they came to Greece, they were astonished. They said, no other civilization is like this. So instead of destroying the library, the Romans saved it. And the Romans took the books from the library back to Rome. And the Romans studied and adopted Greek theory of leadership. And the Roman Empire ruled the whole world. Those of you who study history, the Romans ruled from Africa all the way up to Scotland. So the Romans ruled the world, destroyed themselves. Now here's the big part. The Roman Empire did not fall by invasion. It fell by disintegration. Disintegration means it fell apart, like a piece of cake that just broke up in little pieces. That's how the Roman Empire fell apart. Or you just broke up. And what happened was everybody scrambled for power. And the result was many little kingdoms. Instead of one kingdom, many little kingdoms. Let me give you some of their names. Spaniard, Franco, Belgier. Those Roman kingdoms. Anglo, Roman kingdoms. Portugal, Roman kingdoms. We know these kingdoms in English. Franco, France. Belgier, Belgium. Porco, Portugal. Anglo, Spaniard. They're all kingdoms. They are all Romans. You can get it after I'm gone. They are all Romans. So their psyche, their mentality, ingrained. We were chosen by the gods to rule anybody who don't have our traits. They were chosen by the gods to be our servants and our slaves. They are not complete divine beings like us. We are superior So the French and the Spanish and the Portuguese and the British, Anglo, call them Anglican, they decided to expand their kingdoms. So they came to Africa and the Caribbean. And we call it colonization. Colonization is the expansion of Greek leadership philosophy.